The afternoon sun hung heavy over Pinehurst Country Club, casting long shadows across the pristine fairways and manicured lawns that had witnessed generations of wealth tradition and carefully maintained exclusivity. It was the kind of day that promised nothing more complicated than golf charity and the comfortable rhythm of privilege undisturbed. But some afternoons have a way of unraveling decades of comfortable lies in a matter of minutes. Marcus Delaney's black Mercedes rolled smoothly up the cobblestone drive toward the valet stand, its polished exterior reflecting the Georgian columns of the clubhouse. At 55 years old, Marcus had learned to navigate the world with a particular kind of precision. The kind that came from understanding that every detail mattered, every impression counted, and every interaction carried weight that white men his age never had to consider. His Ralph Lauren polo was pressed to perfection, his khakis tailored just so, and the vintage golf club set in his trunk represented not just equipment, but history, memory, and loss. He was here for a simple reason: to co-host the 12th Annual Children's Memorial Hospital Charity Golf Classic, a tournament he'd helped found over a decade ago. This year, they were on track to raise $500,000. Sick children would receive treatment, families would find hope. It was supposed to be straightforward, meaningful, safe. But as Marcus stepped out of his car, handing his keys to Robert, a 19-year-old valet he'd known since the kid was in high school, he noticed something that made his shoulders tense in a way that no amount of success or money had ever quite eliminated. 3 men stood near the clubhouse bar entrance, watching him. Watching in that particular way Marcus had learned to recognize decades ago. One of them, thick-necked and red-faced, wore a police union cap. Inside the clubhouse, Officer Derek Sloan was on his 3rd beer. The bottle sat on the polished mahogany bar, surrounded by the comfortable darkness of wood paneling. Hunting trophies and portraits of stern-faced men who'd built their fortunes in industries that no longer apologized for what they'd done to build them. Sloan wasn't a member here. He'd never be a member here. He was a guest invited by his brother-in-law who sat on the board, and that distinction mattered to him more than he'd ever admit. At 41 years old, Derek Sloan had spent 18 years in uniform. 18 years of making $58,000 a year while watching people drive past him in cars that cost more than he'd make in 3 years. 18 years of being passed over for promotion twice, while being told it was about temperament and community relations and other coded language that meant they thought he was too rough, too old school, too willing to do what needed doing when the department wanted someone who'd smile for cameras. He'd racked up 6 excessive force complaints, all dismissed or quietly settled by the union. 9 others had been filed and vanished into administrative limbo. His personnel file read like a map of neighborhoods where people didn't have the resources or connections to make complaints stick. And Derek Sloan had learned an important lesson from all of this. The system protected him as long as he stayed just careful enough, just technical enough, just inside the blurry line of plausible deniability. But right now, watching through the clubhouse windows as a black man in expensive clothes emerged from a Mercedes, something in Sloan's chest tightened with familiar resentment. He saw the tailored clothes, the confident posture, the way the valet greeted him warmly like they were friends. And Derek Sloan thought to himself, that doesn't belong here. You see that, Sloan muttered to his buddies, Martinez and Foster, both younger officers who'd learned to stay quiet when Sloan got like this. See what Martinez asked, barely looking up from his phone. That. Sloan gestured with his beer bottle toward the parking lot. Guy just pulled up like he owns the place. Foster glanced out the window, then back to his drink. Maybe he's a member. Yeah, right. Sloan's laugh was sharp and humorless. He set down his beer with enough force to make the bartender glance over. I'm handling this. Before either of his companions could suggest that maybe he shouldn't, Derek Sloan was already moving toward the door, his off-duty swagger carrying him across the threshold and into the sunlight with the absolute certainty of a man who'd never truly faced consequences. Outside, Marcus was talking to Robert about school. The kid had applied for scholarships, was hoping to study engineering, and Marcus had been quietly mentoring him for the past year, the way successful people sometimes do when they remember where they came from. It was a pleasant conversation, normal, until it wasn't. "Hey! Hey! You can't park there!" The voice cut across the parking lot like a gunshot, and Marcus turned slowly, already recognizing the tone before he saw the man. It was a voice he'd heard before in different cities from different faces, but always carrying the same current of assumed authority, mixed with barely suppressed hostility. Derek Sloan strode across the asphalt, his police union cap catching the sunlight, his gait wide-legged and aggressive. Behind him, Martinez and Foster had followed, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict their colleague. Marcus straightened his expression carefully neutral. Robert, sensing trouble, took a small step back, but didn't leave. The kid had good instincts. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice level and polite. 30 years of experience had taught him that the first rule of these encounters was to give them nothing to use against you. No anger, no attitude, just calm, reasonable compliance. "Is there a problem?" Officer Sloan stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be intimidating, too close for casual conversation. "Yeah, there's a problem. This is a private club. Members only. You lost." Marcus felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders. The exhausting burden of having to prove once again that he had a right to exist in a space where his presence was questioned by default. He reached for his wallet, moving slowly and deliberately, keeping his hands visible the way his father had taught him, the way he'd taught his own sons. "I'm a member," Marcus said quietly. "I'm actually co-hosting today's charity tournament. I'm just here to ID." "Now?" Sloane's hand moved instinctively to his belt, a gesture so practiced it was almost unconscious. Even off-duty, even without his service weapon, the movement was there, a visual reminder of who held power in this interaction. Marcus produced his driver's license and his platinum membership card. Pinehurst Country Club member since 1994. His name was engraved in small letters. Marcus J. Delaney. He'd been a member here for 30 years, longer than some of the people watching from the clubhouse windows had been alive. Sloan snatched the cards from Marcus's hand, studying them with exaggerated scrutiny. He held them up to the sunlight, examined the embossed lettering, ran his thumb over the raised text. The performance was deliberate, public, designed to humiliate. "These look fake to me," Sloan announced, loud enough for the small crowd that was beginning to gather. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained steady. "They're not fake. I've been a member here for 3 decades. If you'd like to verify—" "Oh, I'll verify." "All right." Sloan pulled out his phone but didn't dial. He was enjoying this too much to end it quickly. "Who are you supposed to be meeting here?" "A friend." "Thomas." Marcus deliberately didn't elaborate. Some instinct told him that revealing his friend was the mayor would either escalate the situation or end it, and he wasn't sure which was worse. "He's running a bit late, but if you'd like to wait." Thomas Sloan's laugh was ugly. "Your friend Thomas is going to vouch for you." "That's cute. What's Thomas's last name?" "Behind them." Robert cleared his throat. Officer, Mr. Delaney really is a member. He's been coming here for years. He's actually co-hosting the—" "Stay out of this, kid." Sloane's voice snapped like a whip, and Robert flinched. "This is police business. I'm handling it." Marcus noticed the crowd growing larger. 20 people now, maybe 30. Club members in their expensive casual wear standing on the terrace with drinks in hand, watching this unfold like dinner theater. Some had phones out. Most looked uncomfortable. None were intervening. Among them he recognized faces. Mrs. Peterson, who'd played golf with his late wife Anne. Davidson, who sat on the board. Jennifer, the club manager, standing near the entrance with one hand over her mouth, her face pale. All of them watching. All of them silent. This wasn't new. Marcus had lived this moment before in different variations across 3 decades of success that had never quite been enough to insulate him from the assumption that he didn't belong. 20 years ago, driving home from a real estate closing in his Honda Civic, pulled over in a white neighborhood by an officer who couldn't believe he had a legitimate reason to be there. 15 years ago, shopping in an upscale department store followed by security who assumed his credit card would be declined. 10 years ago, checking into a luxury hotel where the desk clerk asked if he was sure he had a reservation. Each time he'd remained calm. Each time he'd produced identification, answered questions, proven himself. Each time he'd swallowed the rage and humiliation because the alternative, showing anger, raising his voice, demanding the respect he'd earned, would only confirm their assumptions about him. And each time he'd driven home and sat in his car for 10 minutes before going inside because he couldn't let his wife and son see how tired he was of proving his humanity. Anne had understood. She'd held him on those nights, hadn't tried to fix it, just acknowledged the weight of it. But Anne had been gone for 2 years now, taken by cancer that the doctors said was stress-related, and Marcus had no one to hold him through this particular exhaustion anymore. So he stood in the parking lot of a country club where he'd donated $2 million to build the junior training facility, and he watched an off-duty cop examine his membership card like it was a forgery, and he felt 30 years of patience beginning to fray at the edges. Sir Marcus said, his voice still controlled but carrying a new edge. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but I assure you everything is in order. If you'd like to speak to the club manager." "I'm not speaking to anybody." Sloane shoved the cards back at Marcus. "Empty your pockets. All of them." The demand hung in the air. Absurd and illegal and entirely predictable. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This was the moment where the encounter could either de-escalate or explode, and the choice wasn't his to make. It had never been his to make. The power dynamic was too clear, too entrenched, too practiced. Officer Marcus said carefully, "You have no legal authority to search me. I'm on private property as a member, and I've committed no crime. I'm a police officer." Sloane stepped closer, and Marcus could smell the beer on his breath now. "I have authority everywhere. Now empty your pockets, or I'll empty them for you." Behind Sloane, Martinez shifted uncomfortably. Foster was staring at his shoes. Neither of them intervened. Marcus made a decision. Not because Sloane had the right to make this demand. He didn't. Not because compliance was the moral choice. It wasn't. But because Marcus Delaney was 55 years old and he'd survived this long by choosing his battles carefully and getting arrested in front of 80 country club members, wasn't going to help the children who needed that $500,000 raised today. So he complied. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled items from his pockets and placed them on the hood of his Mercedes. Wallet, keys, phone, a small money clip. The indignity of it burned, but he kept his face neutral, his movements controlled. Sloane picked up the Rolex on Marcus's wrist, grabbed his arm roughly. "Where'd you get this watch?" Got a receipt. The watch had been his father's, given to Marcus on his 30th birthday, 3 months before his father's death. It was one of the few physical objects Marcus owned that connected him to the man who'd taught him how to navigate a world that didn't want to make space for him. It was a gift, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper now, from my father. Sure it was. Sloane released his arm with a dismissive shove. Let's see what else you've got here. He moved to the trunk, popped it open without asking, and pulled out Marcus's golf club set. The clubs were vintage. Woods and irons from the 1980s, carefully maintained, irreplaceable. Anne had given them to him on their 20th anniversary the year before her diagnosis. She'd spent months tracking them down, finding the exact models Marcus's grandfather had used, restoring them to perfect condition. The 3 wood had been her favorite. She'd used it to beat Marcus by 2 strokes the week before she'd gotten the news that the cancer had spread. Derek Sloane grabbed the bag by the bottom and upended it, dumping the clubs onto the pavement. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed across the parking lot like breaking bones. The vintage 3-wood landed at an angle, and Marcus heard the crack before he saw it. A split running through the wood grain. Irreparable. The crowd gasped. Even from a distance, it was obvious these weren't ordinary clubs. The damage was visible, immediate, and entirely unnecessary. Marcus stared at the broken club. His hands, still at his sides, curled into fists, so tight his nails cut into his palms. Behind his eyes, something went white-hot. Not rage exactly, but something sharper and more clarifying. This was the moment 30 years of composure crystallized into a single thought. Not this time. His voice, when it came, was level. Dangerously level. Pick them up. Sloane actually laughed. Or what Marcus didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because if he opened his mouth again, 3 decades of swallowed insults would come pouring out. And he'd learned long ago that men like Derek Sloane only understood black anger as confirmation of their prejudices. So Marcus stood there, hands steady by force of will, face neutral, by decades of practice, heart hammering against his ribs, like a prisoner against bars, and waited. You can't humiliate a man who refuses to feel shame, his father had told him once. But God Marcus was tired of refusing. Sloane ground his heel into the golf bag, leaving a dirty boot print on the leather. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm calling this in, he announced to no one in particular. Suspicious individual, possible stolen property, trespassing. That's when Marcus realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. Sloane was actually going to arrest him. There would be handcuffs, a booking photo, a mugshot that would circulate online. His clients, the investors, the city council members, the business partners who'd spent years treating him like an equal would see it. The narrative would shift. Not successful businessman, but arrested at country club. The details wouldn't matter to most people. The image would. Marcus reached for his phone to call Thomas, but Sloane was faster. Don't even think about it. Sloane snatched the phone from Marcus's hand before he could dial. You make a call, I charge you with obstruction. Phone stays with me until we're done here. Marcus watched his phone disappear into Sloane's pocket. On the screen, he'd seen Thomas's name. 3 missed calls. His friend had been trying to reach him, probably running late, probably wondering where Marcus was. If Thomas called again, Sloane would just decline it. Jennifer, the club manager, finally found her voice. Officer Sloane, please. Mr. Delaney has been a member since 1994. He's co-hosting today's tournament. This is completely, ma'am. Sloane's voice was steel. Are you refusing to cooperate with a law enforcement officer? Jennifer's face crumbled. She took a step back, tears forming in her eyes, and said nothing more. Marcus watched her retreat and felt something colder than anger settle in his chest. This was the part that hurt worse than Sloane's accusations. The silence, the complicity. The good people who saw injustice happening and chose their own safety over someone else's dignity. He'd remember their faces long after he forgot Sloane's. The scene had taken on a surreal quality, like a play Marcus had watched before but never expected to star in. Around him, the country club continued its lazy Saturday rhythm. Golf carts puttering along distant paths, the soft clink of glasses from the terrace, birdsong from the immaculately maintained trees. Normalcy, continuing obliviously, while his world narrowed to this parking lot, this moment, this man who'd decided Marcus didn't belong. Derek Sloane was speaking into his phone now, his voice carrying across the asphalt with deliberate volume. "Yeah, dispatch. This is Officer Sloane Badge, 2847. I've got a situation at Pinehurst Country Club, 1840 Fairway Drive." Marcus felt his pulse in his throat. Every word Sloane spoke would become part of an official record. Every characterization would be treated as fact by default, because Sloane wore a badge and Marcus didn't. The game was rigged from the beginning, but that didn't mean Marcus could stop playing. Black male, mid-50s. Sloane continued, his eyes locked on Marcus with something that looked like satisfaction. Claiming to be a member, but identification appears questionable. Subject is becoming argumentative and maybe intoxicated. I am not intoxicated. The words came out before Marcus could stop them, sharp and loud and immediately regrettable. Sloane smiled. Dispatch subject is raising his voice and becoming verbally aggressive. I'm concerned about escalation, requesting backup for officer safety. Marcus felt the trap close around him. Every denial, every protest, every reasonable objection would be documented as aggression. The narrative was being written in real time, and he was a character in someone else's story with no control over the plot. Around them, the crowd had grown to 40, maybe 50 people. Phones were out now, recording openly. Marcus couldn't tell if that was good or bad. Video evidence could exonerate him, but it could also be edited, contextualized, used to support whatever story law enforcement wanted to tell. He'd seen it happen before. Among the faces, Marcus recognized more people he knew. Davidson, the board member, was having a quiet, intense conversation with his wife. She kept pulling his arm every time he moved toward the scene, her whispered words inaudible, but their message clear. "Don't get involved. Stay out of it. Not our problem." Davidson stayed where he was. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who'd been friends with Anne, had her hand pressed against her mouth, her eyes wet. She knew what those golf clubs meant. She'd been at the anniversary party where Anne had presented them to Marcus, had seen his face light up like a child's. She knew the 3 wood now cracked on the pavement wasn't just equipment. It was memory, love loss, all the things you couldn't replace. But she didn't step forward either. Robert, the young valet, was the only person who looked actively distressed rather than merely uncomfortable. His phone was in his hand, angled low and subtle, and Marcus realized with a start that the kid was recording. Smart, brave, possibly stupid depending on how this ended. Sloane finished his call and turned back to Marcus with renewed confidence. Backup was coming. Soon there would be more officers, more authority, more weight pressing down on this moment, until Marcus's version of events became irrelevant. Now Sloane said, his voice carrying the tone of a man who'd already won. "We're going to wait right here until my colleagues arrive. You're going to keep your hands where I can see them. You're going to stop with the attitude, and we're going to have a nice, calm conversation about why you're really here." Marcus took a breath, held it, released it slowly. His mind was working through options, none of them good. He could demand to speak to the club president, but that would take time and might be interpreted as non-compliance. He could refuse to answer questions until he had a lawyer, but that would definitely result in arrest. He could try calling Thomas again, but his phone was in Sloane's pocket, and asking for it back would give Sloane another excuse to escalate. Every path led to the same place. He was trapped by the fundamental power imbalance that no amount of money success or membership cards could overcome. Officer Marcus said, choosing his words with surgical precision. "I understand you're doing your job as you see it, but I'm telling you clearly and calmly, I am a 30-year member of this club. I'm co-hosting today's charity golf tournament. I have broken no laws. I've provided identification that you've examined, and I'm asking you respectfully to contact the club manager or the tournament organizers to verify my status before this situation escalates further." It was perfect. Reasonable, respectful, documented on multiple phone cameras as evidence of his cooperation. If this went to court, lawyers would be able to point to this moment and say, "See, he did everything right." But Derek Sloan wasn't thinking about court. He was thinking about the weight of 18 years in uniform, of being passed over for promotion, of making $58,000 a year while watching men like Marcus drive cars that cost 3 times his annual salary. He was thinking about all the times he'd been told to be more community-oriented and all the complaints that made him feel like the department was more interested in protecting criminals than supporting officers. And he was thinking somewhere in the back of his mind about the conversation he'd had with his union rep 6 months ago. "Derek, one more incident, and even we can't protect you." But that thought was easy to ignore when you'd been protected so many times before. "Save the speech," Sloan said. "I've heard it all before. Guys like you always have an explanation, always have some excuse. But you know what I see? I see someone who doesn't belong here, who showed up with expensive property he probably can't afford, who got aggressive when questioned. That's what I see. Guys like you." The phrase hung in the air, its meaning clear to everyone present. Marcus felt something inside him shift. He'd spent 30 years being careful, being strategic, choosing battles and surviving through intelligence rather than confrontation. But there was a limit to how much dignity a person could sacrifice before they stopped recognizing themselves. "Say it." Marcus heard himself speak, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly across the parking lot. "Say what you mean, officer." "Guys like me." "What does that mean exactly?" "Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not putting words anywhere. I'm asking you to clarify. When you say guys like me, what specifically are you referring to? My age, my profession, my car, my clothes." Marcus paused, held Sloane's gaze. "My skin color." "This isn't about race." Sloane's voice rose defensive now. "Don't you dare try to make this about race. I'm doing my job. I'm protecting this community. Protecting it from what? From a member trying to attend a charity event. From a man who's donated millions to this club. From someone who's been coming here longer than you've been on the force." Marcus's voice was still controlled, but there was steel in it now. "Or are you protecting it from the uncomfortable reality that successful black people exist and have every right to occupy the same space as you do?" The crowd was dead silent. Phones were still recording, but no one was speaking. This had gone from an incident to a confrontation, from harassment to something that would have to be addressed one way or another. Sloane's hand moved to his belt again, that instinctive gesture toward a weapon he wasn't wearing. His face was dark red now, a vein pulsing in his temple. Martinez and Foster, his backup officers, were exchanging glances that suggested they were finally belatedly beginning to understand this situation was spiraling out of their control. "You're making this worse for yourself," Sloan said, his voice tight. "I'm trying to handle this professionally, and you're being combative." "I'm being honest," Marcus replied. "If that feels like combat to you, perhaps you should ask yourself why." That's when they heard the sirens. 2 patrol units pulled into the circular drive lights, flashing blue and red across the pristine white columns of the clubhouse. Officers Martinez and Foster, the actual on-duty versions, not the off-duty observers, exited their vehicles with practiced efficiency, assessing the scene quickly. The older of the two, Officer Martinez, approached with his hand resting casually on his belt, his expression neutral. "Derek, what have we got here?" Sloan straightened his voice, slipping into official report mode. "Suspicious individual, refusing to leave private property, possible stolen property, obstruction of a lawful investigation, and verbal aggression toward an officer." Martinez glanced at Marcus, then at the crowd of well-dressed country club members with their phones out, then at the scattered golf clubs and broken three-wood on the pavement. His expression suggested he was rapidly calculating whether this was the kind of incident that would look good on a report or the kind that would generate awkward questions from supervisors. Sir Martinez addressed Marcus directly, his tone significantly more professional than Sloane's. "Can you state your name and your purpose here?" "Marcus Delaney. I'm a 30-year member of this club." Marcus gestured toward his membership pin still visible on his collar. "I'm co-hosting today's charity golf tournament for Children's Memorial Hospital. I arrived about 20 minutes ago to prepare, and Officer Sloan detained me, confiscated my phone, searched my vehicle without permission, and destroyed my personal property." Marcus pointed to the broken club. "That three-wood was a gift from my late wife. It's irreplaceable." Martinez's expression shifted slightly. Foster, the younger officer, was staring at the tournament banners visible from the parking lot. One of them read, "12th Annual Charity Classic, co-hosted by Marcus Delaney and Mayor Thomas Reed." Derek Foster said quietly, "There's a banner with his name on it." "Could be a coincidence," Sloan snapped, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Could be," Martinez said slowly, "but maybe we should verify before we go any further. Sir, do you have anyone who can confirm your membership and your role in today's event?" "The club manager, Jennifer Hartwick. She's standing right there." Marcus pointed to where Jennifer stood frozen near the entrance. "Or you could call your chief, Helen Morrison. Tell her Marcus Delaney is being detained. She'll clarify the situation immediately." Martinez and Sloan exchanged a look. The mention of the chief's name, not as a threat but as a simple statement, had changed the temperature of the moment. Martinez pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. Can you patch me through to Chief Morrison?" There was a pause, some static, then a response. "Chief Morrison is currently off duty. Is this an emergency?" Martinez looked at Marcus, then at the crowd, then at Sloane's flushed face. "Yeah, this is an emergency. Patch me through." Another pause. Then a woman's voice came through the radio, crisp and clearly annoyed at being interrupted on a Saturday. "This is Chief Morrison." "What's the situation?" Martinez keyed his radio. "Chief, this is Officer Martinez. I'm at Pinehurst Country Club. We've got a gentleman here, Marcus Delaney, who Officer Sloan has detained for suspicious behavior. Before we proceed, I wanted to verify." The chief's voice cut through with sudden urgency. "Marcus Delaney, tall, silver hair real estate developer. Marcus Delaney." "Yes, ma'am." "Jesus Christ." There was a long pause, then a new tone of voice. "Is Derek Sloan the one who detained him?" Martinez glanced at Sloan, whose face had gone from red to pale. "Yes, ma'am. Do not, I repeat, do not arrest or further detain Mr. Delaney. Martinez, you take direct control of that scene. Derek, if you're listening to this, stand down immediately. I'm 10 minutes out. Nobody moves. Nobody does anything until I arrive. Is that crystal clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Martinez said. The radio went silent. The parking lot was silent, too. 50 people. 3 police officers and Marcus Delaney standing in the wreckage of what should have been a simple afternoon, all frozen in the uncomfortable awareness that this situation had just become officially serious. Sloane's jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His whole body radiated tension. The posture of a man realizing he might have made a catastrophic error, but unwilling to admit it even to himself. Martinez cleared his throat. "Mr. Delaney, on behalf of the department, I apologize for any—" "Save it," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Just give me my phone back." All three officers looked at Sloane, who slowly, reluctantly pulled Marcus's phone from his pocket and held it out. Marcus took it, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. Not just anger or defensiveness, but fear. Derek Sloane was afraid. Marcus checked his phone. 6 missed calls from Thomas. He dialed back and his friend picked up on the first ring. "Marcus. Where the hell are you? I've been trying to call for 20 minutes. "I'm in the parking lot," Marcus said, suddenly exhausted. "There's been an incident. You should probably get here." "What kind of incident?" Marcus looked at Sloane, at the broken golf club, at the crowd of witnesses who'd watched it all happen. "The kind that's going to require your official presence." "How far away are you 5 minutes? Marcus, are you okay?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "But I will be. Just get here." He ended the call and looked at Martinez. "The mayor is on his way. Your chief is on her way. I suggest we all wait right here exactly as we are until they arrive." Martinez nodded. Foster looked relieved. And Derek Sloane stood there, his hands hanging at his sides, his face a mask of conflicted emotions, watching his career begin to crumble in real time, but still unable to fully accept that he'd brought this on himself. The tournament was supposed to start in 15 minutes. In the distance, Marcus could hear the announcer testing the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting shortly. Please make your way to the first tee." But Marcus wasn't going anywhere. Not until this was finished. Not until every person who'd watched this happen understood exactly what they'd witnessed. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky. The crowd continued to watch, and Marcus Delaney stood in the parking lot of a country club where he'd been a member for 30 years, surrounded by broken golf clubs and broken assumptions, and waited for the world to catch up to what he'd always known. Sometimes justice comes quickly. Sometimes it takes decades. And sometimes it arrives in a black Cadillac with government plates driven by a friend who'd known you since college and who carried the weight of a city's authority in his voice. Marcus heard the engine before he saw the car. It was almost time. The waiting stretched out thick and uncomfortable like the humidity that pressed down on the parking lot. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, some sympathetic, some merely curious, some looking away as if pretending not to notice would absolve them of witnessing. He'd become a spectacle, a disruption in the carefully maintained order of their Saturday afternoon, and he could sense their discomfort radiating across the asphalt like heat shimmer. Among the crowd, Mrs. Peterson had moved closer. She was 73 years old, had been a member of Pinehurst since before Marcus was born, and had played golf with Ann Delaney during those last good months before the cancer made it impossible. Now she stood 20 feet away, her hand still pressed to her mouth, and Marcus could see tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. She knew what that broken three-wood meant. She'd been there on their 20th anniversary, had watched Ann present the restored vintage clubs to Marcus, with a smile that tried to hide how tired she already was. She'd seen Marcus's face transform with joy, had heard Ann whisper to her, "He needs something beautiful to hold on to, for after. After." Such a small word for such a vast absence. Mrs. Peterson took a step forward, then another. Her husband, standing beside her, grabbed her arm gently. "Eleanor, don't. He's been humiliated," she said, her voice carrying across the silence. "In front of everyone. Someone has to. The chief is coming. The mayor is coming. Let them handle it." But Mrs. Peterson pulled her arm free and walked toward Marcus. She moved slowly, her elegant heels clicking on the pavement, and when she reached him, she didn't say anything at first. She just bent down her knees, protesting, and picked up the broken 3-wood. She held it carefully like it was made of glass instead of cracked walnut, and looked at Marcus with eyes that understood loss. "Anne would be proud of you," she said quietly, "for standing here, for not letting them break you along with her gift." Marcus's throat tightened. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Mrs. Peterson turned to face Derek Sloan, and her expression shifted from compassion to something colder. "Officer, I don't know what you thought you were doing, but you've destroyed something irreplaceable. This club belonged to Marcus's late wife. She gave it to him 3 months before she died. It was at her memorial service. I was there." Sloane's face flickered just for a moment with something that might have been discomfort, but he recovered quickly, his jaw setting. "Ma'am, I was investigating suspicious activity." "I didn't intentionally." "You dumped his golf clubs on concrete?" Mrs. Peterson said, her refined voice carrying the kind of authority that came from generations of social power. "That's not investigating. That's vandalism." She set the broken club down gently, gave Marcus's shoulder a brief squeeze, and walked back to her husband. But she'd done something important. She'd named the crime. Not in legal terms, but in moral ones, and everyone watching had heard it. Near the clubhouse entrance, Jennifer finally found movement in her frozen limbs. She approached Martinez, her hands twisting together nervously. "Officer, I'm Jennifer Hartwick, the club manager. I can absolutely confirm that Mr. Delaney is a member in good standing. He's been a member since 1994. He's on our board of directors. He co-founded this tournament. There's been a terrible mistake." Martinez nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. We're waiting for the chief to arrive before we proceed." "Of course. But I just want to be clear for the record that Mr. Delaney belongs here. He's welcome here. This should never have happened." Her voice broke on the last sentence, and Marcus realized she was crying. Guilt, probably. The knowledge that she'd watched this unfold for 20 minutes without intervening, paralyzed by her fear of contradicting police authority. Now, with the chief on the way and the situation safely diffused, she could find her courage. Better late than never, Marcus supposed. But the late part would stay with him longer than the better. A young father had moved closer to the scene, his 6-year-old daughter perched on his shoulders. The girl had been watching with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood, trying to understand the adult tension she could feel, but not quite interpret. "Daddy," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet. "Why was that policeman being mean to the man?" The father hesitated, clearly, struggling with how to explain institutional racism and abuse of power to a first grader. Finally, he said, "Sometimes people make mistakes, honey. Even policemen. But he broke his golf clubs on purpose. I saw him. I know, that's not a mistake. That's being mean." Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. The moral clarity of children, unburdened by the complicated rationalizations adults use to excuse inexcusable behavior. The father met Marcus's eyes across the parking lot, his expression apologetic and ashamed and helpless all at once. Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the attempted explanation, even if it fell short of truth. Davidson, the board member, was still standing with his wife at the terrace edge. Marcus watched as the man's internal struggle played out across his face, the desire to do the right thing battling against the instinct for self-preservation. His wife's hand on his arm was a physical manifestation of that battle. Finally, Davidson pulled free and walked toward the scene. His wife hissed something after him, but he kept walking. Marcus Davidson said as he approached, "I'm so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. I want you to know that the board will be addressing this incident at our next meeting. It was a politician's apology, Specific enough to sound sincere, vague enough to avoid commitment. Marcus looked at him steadily. Will you be addressing why your club has apparently tolerated Officer Sloan as a guest member for 3 years? Or why no one intervened when this happened? Davidson's face colored. That's not entirely fair. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge. How many other incidents have there been? Davidson? How many times has Sloan made someone uncomfortable? How many complaints were quietly smoothed over because it was easier than confronting a police officer? I don't appreciate the accusation, and I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal in a club. Where I've been a member longer than you've been an adult, Marcus replied. But here we are. Davidson opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away without another word. The crowd had grown larger still. Word had spread through the clubhouse. Something was happening in the parking lot, something involving police and Marcus Delaney, and a confrontation no one wanted to miss. The terrace was packed now, drinks forgotten, conversations suspended, everyone watching the drama unfold like it was a reality show instead of a man's dignity being dismantled in public. Among the faces, Marcus saw people he'd done business with, people he'd sat next to at fundraisers, people who'd shaken his hand and praised his philanthropy and invited him to dinner parties where he was often the only person of color in the room. All of them watching, most of them silent. That silence would haunt him later. Not Sloan's aggression. That was expected, almost familiar in its ugly predictability. But the silence of people who knew better, who could have helped, who instead chose the safety of non-involvement. Robert, the young valet, had maintained his position near Marcus's car phone, still recording. The kid's hands were shaking slightly, but his jaw was set with determination. Marcus caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Robert nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was doing. Video evidence could make the difference between Marcus's word against a cop's or documented proof of what had really happened. Derek Sloan stood apart from everyone, his body language radiating defensive tension. Martinez and Foster had positioned themselves between Sloan and Marcus, not obviously but clearly enough that everyone understood they were no longer backing their fellow officer. Sloan had become isolated by his own actions, and he seemed to sense it. His eyes darting around the parking lot like he was looking for an escape route that didn't exist. In the distance, Marcus heard the wail of another siren. Chief Morrison, probably, or more backup. The official machinery was grinding into motion now, and there would be reports filed, statements taken, investigations opened. The bureaucratic process that might result in some form of accountability. But Marcus had learned not to trust that process. He'd seen too many cases where video evidence was deemed inconclusive, where witnesses suddenly couldn't remember details, where police investigations into police behavior resulted in no wrongdoing found, and officers returned to duty with nothing more than a note in their file. He needed more than the system's internal review. He needed public pressure. He needed media attention. He needed the kind of scrutiny that made it impossible to quietly sweep this under the rug. And he needed Thomas. His friend would be here any minute now. Probably speeding, probably furious, probably already planning the political and legal storm he was about to unleash. Thomas Reed had been Marcus's roommate in college, his best man at his wedding, his brother in everything but blood. They'd built their lives in parallel, Marcus in real estate, Thomas in public service, and they'd watched each other navigate the particular challenges of being successful black men in spaces that weren't designed to accommodate them. Thomas understood in a way that white allies never quite could what this moment meant. Not just the immediate humiliation, but the accumulated weight of 1,000 similar moments across a lifetime. The traffic stops and the suspicious glances and the assumptions of criminality that followed them like shadows no achievement could outrun. So yes, Thomas would come, and he would bring the full weight of his office with him. And Derek Sloan was about to discover what happened when you humiliated someone who had powerful friends willing to use that power. But even as Marcus anticipated that vindication, he felt a bone-deep weariness, because he shouldn't need powerful friends to be treated with basic dignity. His membership card should have been enough. His calm explanation should have been enough. His humanity should have been enough. The fact that it took a mayor's intervention to make Sloan back down was its own indictment, not just of Sloan, but of a system that required black people to be exceptional, connected, and irreproachable just to be treated as ordinary human beings. Marcus looked at the broken 3-wood lying on the pavement, and he thought about Anne. She'd fought her cancer with the same stubborn dignity he was trying to maintain, now refusing to let the disease define her, insisting on living fully right up until she couldn't anymore. On her last good day, when she could still walk without help, could still smile without the morphine haze, she'd asked him to promise something. "Don't let them make you bitter," she'd said, her hand warm in his. "Don't let the bastards win by turning you into someone you're not." "I'll try," he'd promised. "Do better than try," she'd replied. "Live well, that's the best revenge." He'd kept that promise for 2 years. Kept building, kept giving, kept showing up to spaces that didn't always welcome him and refusing to be diminished by their discomfort. He'd lived well, lived successfully, lived with as much grace and generosity as he could manage. But standing in this parking lot looking at the wreckage of his late wife's gift, and feeling the weight of 50 witnesses who'd watched him be humiliated, Marcus wondered if living well was enough. Maybe sometimes you had to do more than survive with dignity. Maybe sometimes you had to fight back. The sound of an approaching engine, powerful official arriving fast, cut through his thoughts. The black Cadillac Escalade came around the corner of the clubhouse at a speed that suggested its driver was done with patience. It pulled into the circular drive with authority, its government plates catching the afternoon sun, and Marcus felt something unclench in his chest. Thomas was here. The cavalry had arrived, and Derek Sloan's very bad day was about to get significantly worse. The Cadillac's doors opened with synchronized precision. 2 men in dark suits exited first. Security detail, their movements practiced and professional. They scanned the parking lot, assessed the crowd, positioned themselves with clear sightlines. And then Thomas Reed stepped out. At 52 years old, Mayor Thomas Reed carried himself with the particular bearing of someone who'd earned his authority rather than inherited it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair cut close, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Sharp, intelligent, and currently darkening with anger as he took in the scene before him. He saw Marcus immediately, saw the scattered golf clubs, saw the crowd of onlookers, saw the police officers standing in awkward formation, and his expression shifted from confusion to comprehension to cold fury in the space of 3 seconds. "Marcus." His voice carried across the parking lot concern, cutting through the anger. "Marcus." He strode toward his friend with long, purposeful steps, his security detail flanking him, and the crowd parted like they'd been choreographed. Derek Sloan, standing near Martinez, seemed to shrink slightly as the mayor approached, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of actual authority. Thomas reached Marcus and gripped his shoulders, searching his face. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Marcus said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "Thomas, I can see what this is." Thomas's jaw was tight. He turned to face the officers, his posture shifting from friend to mayor in an instant. "Someone want to explain why my friend is standing in a parking lot surrounded by police and broken property?" Martinez stepped forward, his voice professional but cautious. "Sir, I'm Officer Martinez. I was called to the scene approximately 15 minutes ago. Officer Sloan," He gestured toward Derek had detained Mr. Delaney on suspicion of trespassing and possible stolen property. Thomas's eyebrows rose. Trespassing? At a club where he's been a member for 3 decades. Sir, I didn't know Sloan started, but Thomas cut him off with a look. I'm not talking to you yet. He turned back to Martinez. Continue. When I arrived, I contacted Chief Morrison to verify Mr. Delaney's identity and status. The chief instructed us to stand down and wait for her arrival. Mr. Delaney has been fully cooperative. There's been no further incident. No further incident, Thomas repeated slowly. He bent down and picked up the broken 3 wood, examining the crack in the wood grain. This was damaged before you arrived. Martinez glanced at Sloan, then nodded. Yes, sir. Thomas turned the club over in his hands, and Marcus saw the exact moment his friend recognized it. They'd played golf together countless times, and Thomas had seen these clubs before. He knew their history. He knew what they meant. Jesus, Marcus Thomas said softly. Anne's clubs. Yeah. The single word carried 30 years of friendship, 2 years of grief, and the exhausting weight of this entire afternoon. Thomas's hands tightened on the club, his knuckles going white, and when he looked at Derek Sloan, his expression was no longer that of a concerned friend. It was the face of a mayor who'd just witnessed an officer destroy something irreplaceable for no reason other than prejudice and ego. Officer Sloan Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. Would you like to tell me in your own words why you detained Marcus Delaney? Sloan straightened, trying to recover some dignity. Sir, I observed a suspicious individual. Suspicious how he pulled up in an expensive vehicle to a private club, and I wanted to verify his membership, which he showed you. The card appeared questionable. Based on what expertise are you trained in identifying forged membership cards? Sloane's face flushed. No, but so you had no actual reason to doubt its authenticity. You just decided it looked fake. Thomas took a step closer. And then what happened? I asked him to empty his pockets. On what legal grounds? Officer safety. He's in a wheelchair. Thomas's voice rose, slightly incredulous. No, he was standing. Sloan was flustered now, his narrative falling apart under questioning. I just needed to ensure there were no weapons at a country club golf tournament. Thomas's tone made it clear what he thought of that justification. And then you searched his vehicle. I had reason to believe there might be stolen property. Based on what evidence? Sloan opened his mouth, closed it. Opened it again. Just a feeling. A feeling. Thomas let that hang in the air for a long moment. Then he held up the broken club. And this? I was examining his golf equipment, and you dumped them on the concrete. I saw the marks on the pavement. Thomas's voice had gone cold now, all pretense of courtesy stripped away. You deliberately destroyed personal property belonging to a man you had no legitimate reason to detain. It was an accident, Officer Martinez Thomas said, not taking his eyes off Sloan. Did you see the golf bag when you arrived? Yes, sir. It was lying on its side, clubs scattered. Several appeared damaged. So, not an accident. A deliberate action. Thomas finally looked away from Sloan, his gaze sweeping across the crowd of country club members. And how many of you watched this happen? Silence. Uncomfortable shifting. People suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. 40, 50 people. Thomas's voice carried across the parking lot. All of you standing there with your phones out recording, watching as an officer harassed a man you know, many of you know. Marcus personally, and not one of you intervened. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, her voice shaking. Mayor Reed. I tried. I know Eleanor. Thank you. Thomas's tone softened for her, then hardened again as he addressed the crowd. The rest of you should be ashamed. Davidson started to speak. Mayor, we didn't want to interfere with police doing what exactly? Violating a citizen's rights, destroying property, profiling a man based on the color of his skin. Thomas's anger was fully unleashed now. You're all so comfortable with your silence, so practiced at looking away. And that's why incidents like this keep happening. He turned back to Sloan. I want to be very clear about something, officer. Marcus Delaney isn't just my college roommate. He's not just a successful businessman. He's a man who has given more to this city than you'll likely accomplish in your entire career. He's donated millions to local charities. He's mentored countless young people. He's built housing for low-income families. He's made this city better by his presence in it. Thomas paused, letting that sink in. And you treated him like a criminal because he drove a nice car to a country club he's belonged to for 30 years. You searched him without cause. You confiscated his property. You destroyed something he can't replace. And you did all of this while off-duty, which means you weren't even acting in any official capacity. You were just a man with a badge asserting dominance over someone you decided didn't belong. Sloane's face was dark red now, sweat beading on his forehead. Sir, I was trying to protect. Protect who from what? From a black man in a polo shirt carrying golf clubs? Thomas shook his head in disgust. Let me tell you what you really did, Officer Sloane. You exposed yourself. You showed everyone here exactly who you are. And now you're going to face the consequences of that exposure. He pulled out his phone and dialed, putting it on speaker. Helen. I'm at Pinehurst. I need you here immediately. Chief Morrison's voice came through clearly. I'm 3 minutes out. What's the situation Officer Derek Sloane has committed? What appears to be multiple violations of departmental policy and possibly criminal statutes. I have dozens of witnesses and video evidence. When you arrive, I'll need you to take direct control of this scene and begin an immediate investigation. Understood. Do you need? What I need is for this department to finally do what it should have done years ago and hold this officer accountable. I've reviewed his file, Helen. 15 complaints, 9 dismissed or settled. And now this. It stops today. I'll be there in 2 minutes. The call disconnected. Thomas turned to Robert, the young valet who'd been recording. Son, can you send me that video? Robert nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I got everything. From the beginning. Thank you. That took courage. Thomas looked at Marcus. You okay to wait a few more minutes? The chief needs to take statements. I've waited this long, Marcus said. I can wait a bit longer, as long as I know this isn't going to get buried. It won't. Thomas's voice carried absolute certainty. I promise you, brother, this won't get buried. Behind them, Derek Sloane stood with his hands hanging at his sides, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He'd gone from confident authority to defensive explanation to silent dread over the course of 30 minutes. And now he was standing in the wreckage of his own choices, watching his career circle the drain in real time. Martinez and Foster had moved even further away from him, creating physical distance that matched their emotional separation. They'd realized probably too late that this wasn't going to be one of those incidents that got smoothed over. This was going to be documented, investigated, and prosecuted, and they wanted no part of being associated with it. The crowd had quieted, now the earlier murmuring replaced by tense silence. Some people were still recording. Others had put their phones away, perhaps uncomfortable with the idea that they'd captured their own inaction on video. The whole scene had taken on a surreal quality. A Saturday afternoon at a country club transformed into a public reckoning with power, privilege, and prejudice. Another siren announced Chief Morrison's arrival. Her patrol car pulled into the lot with none of the aggressive speed Sloane's backup had used, but with clear purpose. She emerged wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a blazer, her silver hair pulled back, her expression already set in the neutral mask of someone about to conduct an investigation. Helen Morrison had been chief for 3 years. She was 57, white, and had made her reputation as a reformer who believed in community policing and accountability. She'd tried multiple times to find sufficient cause to fire Derek Sloan, but the police union had blocked her at every turn, and the city council had been unwilling to fight that battle. Now, walking across the parking lot toward her problem officer, she looked like someone who'd just been handed the smoking gun she'd been searching for. "Mr. Mayor. Mr. Delaney." She nodded to both men. "Officer Martinez, what's your assessment?" Martinez gave a concise summary. Sloane's initial detention, the search, the property damage, Marcus's cooperation, the chief's standing order to stand down. Morrison listened without interrupting, then turned to Sloane. "Derek, you're suspended. Effective immediately. Badge and weapon." "Chief, I can explain." "You can explain during your formal interview, which will be scheduled within 48 hours. Right now, I need your badge and your off-duty weapon. I'm not armed. Then, just your badge." Sloane's hands shook as he reached for his belt, removing the badge he'd carried for 18 years. He held it for a moment, as if the weight of it might somehow save him, then handed it to Morrison with visible reluctance. "You'll receive written notice of charges within 24 hours, Morrison said, her voice clinical. "Until then, you're not to contact any witnesses or discuss this case with anyone except your union representative and attorney. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Officer Martinez, please escort Officer Sloane off the property." As Martinez guided Sloane toward his vehicle, a woman stepped out from the crowd. She was in her late 30s, black, professionally dressed, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. Chief Morrison, Mayor Reed. She approached with her hand extended. "My name is Adrian Johnson. I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Division at the ACLU." Thomas and Morrison both turned to her with interest. "I'm here as a guest of the Harrisons," Adrian continued, gesturing toward an older couple on the terrace. "I witnessed this entire incident. But more importantly, I know Officer Sloane." Derek Sloane, being led to his car by Martinez, froze. His head turned slowly toward Adrian, and the blood drained from his face in a way that suggested recognition and dread. 3 years ago, Adrian said, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "Officer Sloane pulled me over on Riverside Drive. He said my taillight was out. It wasn't. He searched my car without permission, made me sit on the curb with my children crying in the back seat, and told me to control my children when they got upset." She paused, letting that image settle in the minds of her audience. "I filed a complaint. It was dismissed. The union representative said I was mistaken about the timeline, that Officer Sloane had followed proper procedure. But I'm an attorney, and I know what proper procedure looks like. So I started collecting stories." She pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to Morrison. 11 women, all black or Latina, all pulled over within a 5-mile radius of Officer Sloane's patrol zone over the past 6 years. All subjected to searches without probable cause. All filed complaints that were either dismissed or settled quietly by the department. Morrison's face darkened as she flipped through the pages. "Where did you get this information?" "Public records requests, FOIA inquiries, and direct interviews with the complainants. Everything in that folder is documented and verifiable." Thomas looked at Morrison. "Helen, are you telling me there are 11 other cases like this? I knew about some of them," Morrison said tightly. "The union fought every attempt at discipline. But I didn't know about all of this, or that there was a pattern this clear. Adrian turned to Marcus. Mr. Delaney, I'd like to represent you in a civil rights lawsuit against Officer Sloan and the department, pro bono, and I'd like to reopen cases for all 11 of these women. With your incident and the video evidence we have here, I believe we can build a federal case. Marcus looked at Thomas, who nodded. Then he looked at the folder in Morrison's hands, thinking about 11 women who'd been humiliated, searched, treated like criminals, and then dismissed when they tried to seek justice. Yes, Marcus said. Absolutely yes. Derek Sloan, still standing by Martinez's car, seemed to collapse in on himself. This wasn't just one incident anymore. It wasn't just his word against Marcus Delaney's. It was a pattern documented and undeniable, and it was going to destroy him. Martinez gently guided him into the passenger seat, and the patrol car pulled away, carrying Derek Sloan away from the country club and toward the end of everything he'd built his identity around. Chief Morrison turned to Thomas. I'll need to take formal statements from everyone involved, and I'll be opening an internal investigation into why these complaints were dismissed. Internal isn't going to be enough, Thomas said. I'm calling the state attorney general. This needs an independent review, and I want a public report within 30 days. Morrison nodded. I agree. But let's start with what we can control. Mr. Delaney. I'm deeply sorry for what happened here today. As chief, I take full responsibility for the failure to properly supervise Officer Sloan. This should never have happened. Marcus accepted the apology with a nod, but his expression remained guarded. He'd heard official apologies before. What mattered now was whether anything actually changed. The tournament announcer's voice crackled over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll be starting in approximately 20 minutes. Please make your way to the first tee. Marcus looked at Thomas. I should probably... Yeah, go do what you came here to do. Raise money for sick kids. Show them that Derek Sloan doesn't get to define your day. Thomas clapped his friend on the shoulder. I'll handle the statements and paperwork. You go be successful and philanthropic and everything that terrifies men like him. Marcus managed a small smile. Live well. Best revenge. Anne was a smart woman. Yeah, she was. As Marcus walked toward the clubhouse to begin the tournament he'd waited 3 hours to start, he passed by the crowd of members who'd watched everything unfold. Some looked away. Some nodded apologetically. Mrs. Peterson reached out and squeezed his hand as he passed, but Davidson, the board member who'd been too afraid to intervene earlier, stopped him. Marcus, the board wants to meet. Emergency session. Tonight at 7. Marcus looked at him steadily. I'll be there, but I'm going to have a list of demands, not requests. You need to decide if you're ready for that. Davidson swallowed hard. We're ready. We'll see. Robert, the young valet, fell into step beside Marcus as they walked toward the entrance. Mr. Delaney, I sent the video to the mayor and to my cloud storage. Just in case. Thank you, Robert. What you did took real courage. It's what anybody should do, Robert said. Bear witness. That's what my mom always says. When you see wrong, you bear witness. Otherwise, it's like it never happened. Marcus looked at this 19-year-old kid who understood justice better than most of the adults in the crowd, and he felt a flicker of something like hope. Your mom raised you right. She'll like hearing that. Robert grinned. Now go raise some money. Those kids need it. Marcus straightened his shoulders, adjusted his collar, and walked into Pinehurst Country Club with his head high. Behind him, the broken golf club lay on the pavement, evidence of what had been destroyed. But ahead of him was a tournament to complete money to raise and a statement to make about refusing to be diminished by hate. Derek Sloan had tried to break him. The country club members had tried to ignore him. The system had tried to protect its own at his expense, but Marcus Delaney was still standing, still here, still refusing to accept anything less than the dignity he'd earned. And before this was over, things were going to change. Not because the system suddenly developed a conscience, but because Marcus, Thomas, Adrian, Robert, and 11 women who'd refused to stay silent were going to force it to. The tournament went forward. Marcus stood at the first tee microphone in hand and addressed the crowd of golfers and donors who'd gathered despite, or perhaps because of the incident that had delayed everything. His voice was steady, his words carefully chosen, and if anyone noticed the slight tremor in his hands when he mentioned the tournament's purpose, they were gracious enough not to comment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for your patience today. We're here for one reason: to raise money for children fighting battles no child should have to fight. Whatever else happened this afternoon, that purpose remains unchanged. Let's show these kids what a community can do when it comes together." The applause was genuine, perhaps more enthusiastic than it might have been under normal circumstances. Guilt was a powerful motivator, and there were a lot of guilty consciences in that crowd. The tournament raised $647,000, more than they'd ever raised before. Marcus suspected some of that was conscience money, people donating extra to prove they were on the right side to demonstrate their solidarity now that it was safe to do so. He accepted the checks with grace. The kids needed the money regardless of motivation. But while Marcus was playing golf and smiling for photos, Thomas Reed was orchestrating a different kind of game. The mayor had spent the past 3 hours on the phone making calls, applying pressure, and setting into motion the machinery of accountability that only worked when someone with power decided to make it work. By 6 o'clock, Derek Sloan had been formally suspended without pay pending investigation. By 7 o'clock, the local news had the story complete with Robert's video and statements from eyewitnesses. By 8 o'clock, it had gone regional. By 9 o'clock, national news outlets were picking it up because off-duty cop harasses black businessmen at country club hit every cultural nerve of the moment. The emergency board meeting began exactly at 7 o'clock in the Pinehurst Country Club's private conference room. Present were all 7 board members: Marcus, Thomas, Jennifer, the club manager, and the club's attorney, a nervous man named Phillips who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Davidson called the meeting to order, his voice stiff with formality. "We're here to address the incident that occurred this afternoon and to hear from Mr. Delaney regarding his concerns." "Let's not dress this up." Marcus said, his patience for diplomatic language exhausted. "An off-duty police officer harassed me, searched me without cause, destroyed my property, and attempted to have me arrested, all while being a guest member of this club, and 50 of your members watched it happen without intervening. So my first question is, has this happened before silence?" Marcus looked at Jennifer. "Has it?" Jennifer glanced at the board members, received no guidance, and made the choice to tell the truth. 2 years ago, Officer Sloan confronted a black couple at the pool. The Washingtons. They were guests of the Harrison family. Sloan said their passes looked forged. "And what happened?" "Mr. Peterson," she nodded toward one of the board members, "said it was a misunderstanding. His brother-in-law is Officer Sloan. He suggested we let it go." Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "I thought it was handled diplomatically." "You thought wrong." Marcus cut him off. "You protected a racist cop because he was family, and by doing so you enabled what happened to me today. Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait." Marcus's voice was steel. "I've been a member here for 30 years. I've donated over $2 million to this club. I've brought prestigious events and positive publicity. And apparently none of that was enough to earn me the benefit of the doubt when a drunk cop decided I didn't belong here." He let that sink in. "So here's what's going to happen. Either this club makes substantial documented changes to its membership policies, guest policies, and incident response procedures, or I resign. I take my donations with me. I take my name off the building. And I make sure every media outlet knows exactly why. Thomas, sitting beside Marcus, added his weight to the ultimatum. And just so we're clear, I'll be reviewing whether city contracts with entities that maintain discriminatory practices violate our municipal code. This club hosts several city-sponsored events annually. That relationship will be reevaluated. The board members exchanged panicked glances. The club's attorney leaned forward. Mr. Delaney, I'm sure we can reach an accommodation. I don't want accommodation. I want change. Marcus pulled out a folder. He'd spent the 2 hours after the tournament drafting specific demands. These are non-negotiable. He slid copies across the table. The board members read in silence, their faces growing increasingly uncomfortable. The demands included immediate termination of Derek Sloan's guest membership and investigation of any board member who sponsored him, revision of guest policies to include anti-discrimination language with enforcement mechanisms, establishment of a diversity and inclusion committee with real authority to review complaints. Goal of 30% minority membership within 5 years with active recruitment efforts. Mandatory anti-bias training for all staff and board members. Public apology from the club for the incident and for previous failures to address discrimination. Annual scholarship program for minority youth funded at $50,000 per year and renaming of the junior facility to honor victims of discrimination with specific mention of the Washingtons. Davidson read through the list twice. Marcus, some of these are ambitious. The 30% diversity goal alone, is it ambitious or is it just uncomfortable? Marcus leaned forward. Pinehurst has been over 95% white for its entire existence. You've had exactly 3 black members in 100 years. That's not tradition. That's exclusion. Peterson tried a different approach. We're not opposed to diversity, but forcing quotas. It's not a quota. It's a goal. And if you can't achieve it through good faith effort, then that tells us something about your commitment. Thomas added, these demands aren't radical gentlemen. They're baseline standards that most organizations adopted decades ago. The fact that they seem radical to you is exactly the problem Marcus is addressing. The club's attorney intervened again. Legally speaking, private clubs do have certain protections regarding membership decisions. And legally speaking, Thomas countered clubs that discriminate can lose tax-exempt status, face civil rights lawsuits, and find themselves very publicly on the wrong side of history. Your call. Another board member, an older woman named Patricia Richardson, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. I support these demands. All of them. We should have done this years ago. Patricia Davidson started, but she cut him off. No, I'm tired of being embarrassed by this club. I'm tired of watching good people get treated poorly because they don't fit someone's narrow idea of who belongs here. Marcus is right. If we don't change, we deserve to fail. 2 other board members nodded agreement. Davidson looked around the table and realized the vote wasn't going his way. All right, he said finally. We'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of implementing Mr. Delaney's demands as written. 5 hands went up immediately. A 6th rose more slowly. Davidson and Peterson sat with their hands down, their faces rigid with disapproval. Motion carries 6-2. Davidson announced, his voice flat. Mr. Delaney, we accept your terms. I want it in writing, signed by every board member, and I want monthly progress reports on the diversity initiative. You'll have it, Patricia Richardson said. Thank you for not giving up on us. Marcus nodded but didn't smile. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for everyone who comes after me. so they don't have to go through what I went through today." The meeting adjourned shortly after. Thomas and Marcus walked to the parking lot together, both exhausted from a day that had started with simple charity and ended with confrontation. "You did good," Thomas said. "We're not done yet," Marcus replied. "Sloan still needs to face real consequences, and there are 11 other women who deserve justice. Adrian Johnson is already filing paperwork. Federal civil rights lawsuit, pattern and practice. She's going after the department's settlement process, too. Wants to expose how they've been quietly paying off complaints without addressing the underlying behavior." Marcus looked at his friend. "This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly. We're just making people look at it." 3 weeks later, the cascade of consequences was in full effect. Derek Sloan had been fired. The police union had fought it, but the combination of video evidence, media pressure, and the revelation of 11 previous complaints created an untenable situation. Chief Morrison had presented the city council with a choice: fire Sloan or face a federal investigation into the department's complaint process. The council voted 8-1 for termination. Sloan's attempt to appeal went nowhere. His lawyer, recognizing the mountain of evidence and the complete absence of public sympathy, advised him to accept the termination in exchange for the city not pursuing criminal charges for destruction of property and filing false reports. Sloan took the deal. At 41 years old, after 18 years on the force, he was unemployed and unemployable in law enforcement. The police union, facing its own public relations nightmare, quietly distanced itself from him. Captain Victor Lang, the union president who'd orchestrated the dismissal of so many complaints, found himself under federal investigation. Adrian Johnson's lawsuit had uncovered a troubling pattern. Lang had personally intervened in 14 cases involving officers with multiple complaints, including 9 of Sloan's. The FBI was now investigating whether Lang had violated civil rights statutes by deliberately suppressing complaints based on the race of the complainants. Lang resigned as union president and retired with his pension under threat. The investigation was ongoing. The 11 women from Adrian's files became the foundation of a class action lawsuit that eventually expanded to 23 plaintiffs as more victims came forward. The case settled 8 months later for $1.4 million, with the city also agreeing to implement new oversight mechanisms and mandatory body cameras for all officers, including during off-duty incidents at public venues. Pinehurst Country Club followed through on its commitments, though not without resistance. Peterson resigned from the board rather than support the changes. Davidson remained but became a vocal critic, arguing that the club was abandoning its traditions. He was outvoted consistently. By the end of the year, membership diversity had increased to 14%. It wasn't 30, but it was progress. The junior facility was renamed the Anne Delaney Memorial Training Center, honoring Marcus's late wife and symbolizing the club's commitment to a more inclusive future. The scholarship program funded its first cohort of minority youth, including Robert the valet, who'd recorded everything. Marcus personally mentored 3 of the scholarship recipients. But the most significant change was harder to quantify. It was the shift in culture. The understanding that silence enabled injustice, that tradition could mask discrimination, and that comfortable people needed to be made uncomfortable if anything was going to change. 6 months after that Saturday afternoon, Marcus returned to Pinehurst for the spring charity tournament. He pulled up to the same valet stand at the same time of day, the sun hanging at nearly the same angle it had that day in September. But everything else was different. Robert, now a college freshman studying engineering with a full scholarship, jogged over to greet him with a genuine smile. "Mr. Delaney." "Good to see you, sir. Your usual spot." "Thanks, Robert. How's school?" "Amazing. Professor Chen actually mentioned you in my business ethics class. Said you were a case study in standing on principle. Marcus smiled. Hope it was a good case study. The best kind. The one where the good guys win. As Marcus walked toward the clubhouse, he passed the bronze plaque that had been installed 3 months earlier. It read Anne Delaney Memorial Training Center, in memory of a woman who believed in grace, dignity, and second chances, in honor of a man who stood his ground so others wouldn't have to. May all who enter here be welcomed. He ran his fingers over the engraving, remembering Anne's laugh, her stubbornness, her insistence that love was stronger than hate if you refused to let hate make you smaller. She'd been right. She was usually right. Inside the clubhouse, Jennifer greeted him warmly. She'd been promoted to regional director after providing crucial testimony in the civil rights lawsuit, her willingness to admit the club's failures earning her respect from the new board leadership. Marcus, welcome back. We've got 3 new minority members joining us today. I'd love to introduce you. I'd like that. The tournament was smaller this year. Some longtime members had resigned in protest of the changes, claiming the club had become too political. But the energy was different, lighter, more genuine, people who wanted to be there rather than people protecting an exclusive space. On the practice green, Marcus spotted a 14-year-old girl working on her putting form. She was black, focused her stance professional, one of this year's scholarship recipients if he remembered correctly. He walked over. Your grip is a little off. Want some help? She looked up, recognized him, and her eyes went wide. Mr. Delaney? Yes, please. He adjusted her hands, showed her the proper angle. There. Now try it. She sank a 15-footer, her face lighting up with joy. You're a natural, Marcus said. Keep practicing. Maybe one day you'll beat me. Maybe one day I'll beat everyone, she replied with a grin. That's the spirit. Thomas arrived shortly after, and they walked the course together before the tournament started talking about everything and nothing, the way old friends do. At the spot where Marcus's clubs had been scattered 6 months ago, they both paused. You thinking about that day? Thomas asked. Hard not to. It's strange. That was one of the worst days of my life, but it led to some of the most important changes I've been part of. That's how it works sometimes. Crisis creates opportunity, though I wish it didn't require crisis. Me too. Marcus looked at the clubhouse, at the diverse group of people gathering for the tournament, at the changes that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. But I'll take the opportunity when it comes. They played golf. They raised money for sick children. $580,000 this time, slightly less than the shame-fueled donations of the previous tournament, but still substantial. They celebrated with donors and members who genuinely wanted to be part of something better. And when the day ended, Marcus drove home in his Mercedes with a set of new golf clubs in the trunk. They were vintage, carefully sourced, and restored by Thomas as a replacement for the ones Sloan had destroyed. Beautiful clubs. Perfect replicas. But they weren't the same. They couldn't be. Anne hadn't chosen them. Her hands hadn't touched them. They were symbols of friendship and support, but not memory. The broken 3-wood sat on a shelf in Marcus's study, now cracked but preserved. A reminder. Evidence. Proof of what had happened and what had changed. Marcus thought about Derek Sloan, sometimes wondered what he was doing now, whether he'd learned anything or simply blamed others for his downfall. He thought about the 11 women 23 now who'd found their voices and their vindication. He thought about Robert recording on his phone and Mrs. Peterson picking up the broken club and Adrian Johnson standing in that parking lot with her folder of evidence. Most of all, he thought about Anne, her voice echoing across 2 years of absence. Don't let them make you bitter. Live well. That's the best revenge. He'd lived well. but he'd also fought back. And maybe sometimes the best revenge was both things at once. Living fully while refusing to accept injustice, building success while demanding dignity, surviving with grace while fighting for change. The phone rang. Thomas. Hey, brother. City Council just approved the Civilian Review Board with subpoena power. Unanimous vote. Thought you'd want to know. That's good news. It's because of what you did. What we did. The pressure we kept on. It matters. Yeah. It does. You sound tired. Marcus looked at the broken club on his shelf, then at the tournament photo from today. Diverse faces, genuine smiles. A club that was finally starting to reflect the world it existed in. I am tired. But it's a good tired. The kind you earn. Best kind. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow. Marcus hung up and sat in his study for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around him. Tomorrow there would be more work to do. There were always systems to fix, policies to implement, people to mentor, changes to protect and expand. But tonight, he was simply a man who'd stood his ground, survived the storm, and come out the other side with his dignity intact and his community a little bit better. Anne would be proud. He was proud too. And that, finally, was enough. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that silence enables injustice, then share it. Not for clicks or views, but because patterns only change when witnesses refuse to look away. Your voice matters. Your action matters. Your willingness to stand with those who are treated unjustly matters. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is bear witness. And sometimes justice doesn't arrive on its own. We have to fight for it, demand it, and refuse to accept anything less. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being the kind of person who doesn't look away.